Welcome to Conversations with the CEO. I'm Ann Peterson, the Director of Communications, and this is the second part of a two-part series where we're sitting down with Tim O'Keefe to talk about his tenure here at Rossmore and also what he sees as the future after he retires and hands off to his successor. Welcome, Tim.
Thanks, Ann.
Thanks for joining us. So let's talk a little bit about what you see as some of the future challenges that are going to face Rossmore, starting with the fact that you will be our last CEO. The new person coming in will be a general manager. Why the change in the title? Why did you think that was a good idea?
So, when I gave my notice to the board that I was going to be retiring, I also made a recommendation to them that they consider changing the title, because the title CEO, Chief Executive Officer, which you typically find in the corporate environment, the for-profit corporate environment, usually means that that person has all the power, all the authority to make all the decisions. Basically, the buck stops right there with that person. And that's normally how you find most corporate structures, the way they're set up. But it's a misnomer here, because the CEO, my position, has none of that authority, literally none. All the authority, the decision-making authority, comes from the board of directors, and they make all of the decisions of consequence here. They set all the policy, they set the budgets, they make all the spending decisions for capital items and so on. The only decisions that the CEO that I can make are hiring decisions and staff policy decisions. That's it. There's really very little else that I can control. Now, when the board adopts a budget, then my job then is to execute either the budget or their policies or their decisions, and then the staff below me do that. So that really is more consistent with the definition of a general manager. So you'll find the general manager title used in things like the general manager of East Bay Mud, the general manager of the Central Contra Costa Sanitary District. So general manager terms are often used in public agencies that are quasi, they might have a revenue component to them, might be a general manager. Also, in the property management industry, the term for an on-site manager is a general manager. Throughout the country, they're all called general managers. It's very, very rare to find one that's called a CEO. So here in Rossmore, in the beginning, the original person doing my job, way back in the 1960s, was called the administrator. And then, I'm not sure when, it changed to executive director, which was that was the title, which is the typical title you find for the top person in a nonprofit corporation is called an executive director. And then at some point, it changed to general manager, and it was that for a couple of decades. And then about 2 decades ago, the job changed to CEO. And probably it was, the community was run differently then. And that title probably fit better, but it also led to a whole lot of other problems, which is why MOD was created. And then the person who was the general manager who became the CEO, and then he passed away, and then the title has stuck as CEO ever since. But a lot of residents contact me. They don't usually ask me to do something, they tell me or order me to do something. You're the CEO, right? You can make all the decisions. Tell my mutual to do this. I don't like the trees that are blocking my view, or I want to plant something in my garden area that the mutual is telling me I can't do. You need to tell them that it's my property, I get to do that. Well, no, I can't. And that's the thing. My position has no authority, zero authority over the mutuals. I cannot direct a mutual to do anything. The Golden Rain Foundation has no authority over a mutual. And so I felt that this is the time to make the change. I think it's a disservice, honestly, to, I took the job knowing that it was a general manager role because I was in the industry years ago. And so I thought, well, interesting, they call it a CEO. So maybe here in Rossmore, maybe the CEO does have more authority. Maybe they've changed their governing documents. They have not. So it is a general manager role. And the general manager, the definition is that That's the top manager for the organization taking direction from a board of directors. That's really the essence of a general manager. And that's really what this position is. So this is the time to do it, make the change. It doesn't change who's going to apply.
Right.
It's not going to change the pay rate or anything, but maybe it helps to convey to the community a better definition or maybe an expectation of what this person can do for them. General manager takes direction.
So I want to talk a little bit about the trust agreement, but before we do that, can you just explain briefly to the residents, as brief as you can, the difference between what GRF is versus the mutuals, just so they kind of have an understanding?
So the best way, perhaps, of explaining the difference, because usually people's eyes glaze over when I talk about this stuff, is to think that you're in your car, you're driving up your street, and you're on say Golden Rain Road, or now you're off onto, you're going to turn into your entry. The moment the tires of your car get into your entry, you're now on mutual property. You were on GRF property, now you're on mutual property. As soon as those tires cross over. Now, all the rules of the mutual apply, none of the rules of the Golden Rain Foundation apply. You drive your car back onto the street, you come down to the clubhouse, now all of the rules of the Golden Rain Foundation apply, and none of the rules of the mutual apply. So that's kind of the difference. Now, what does that mean? So, in essence, the mutuals are responsible for all of the rules around your housing. What color you can paint your unit outside, whether you can modify your unit on the outside, whether you can put plants in your garden space or not. All of that is all mutual decisions. GRF does not do anything, cannot pass any rules around anything around a mutual. Where this gets a little confusing is MOD. MOD was created about 20 years ago to be the property management arm of GRF for the benefit of the mutuals. And if you watch the first part of this series, I touched on it for just an instant. When the mutuals were created, there's a thing called CC&Rs, Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, and they are recorded with the property with the County of Contra Costa. So that means that if you buy a unit in Rossmoor, you are subject to the Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions of your mutual. In those governing documents, it makes reference to the Golden Rain Foundation as the trustee of the Golden Rain Foundation Trust. And the mutual is required to collect the GRF's operating cost in their budget. But what happened in the 1990s is that GRF ran as if it was in charge of everything. And so the CEO at that time made all of the decisions for the mutuals, dictated to them their budgets, and GRF had no legal authority to do that. And so mutuals were bucking that. They were objecting to GRF like a heavy hand over their operations. And so some of them left the management of GRF at the time, and they hired outside property managers to manage their property. And I think it was First, was the one who left. And then another one, a big one, I'm not sure which one it was threatening to leave as well. And that isn't good, because they weren't happy on the outside either. The outside property manager, you're never going to get the kind of service that an inside property manager can provide to you. So in order to bring them back into the fold and prevent the other mutuals from leaving, GRF created MOD as the property management arm. But while it's a department within GRF, it is under the control of the mutuals. So Paul Donner currently is the MOD director. He's been doing that role for about 30 years. He reports to me, but the budget for MOD is established by the mutuals. They agree to the operating budget and the service level that they're going to provide to the mutuals. Most of them provide nearly identical services, but some of them supplement MOD services. They hire an extra carpentry crew, for example, in second. And there's other services. They want a little bit more of this, a little bit less of this. So they're kind of customized a little bit. But there, in that model, what that means is that MOD is an agent for the mutual. And what that means is that an agent takes direction from a principal. So in that case, the mutual is the principal. They are directing MOD as the agent to execute their decisions, their budgets, their rules. And so MOD does that. So that's an example where MOD, which is GRF, is taking direction from the mutual, never the other way around. Never can GRF or MOD direct the mutual to do something. MOD can recommend to the mutual to do a certain thing, but they can never direct the mutual to do that, ever. So that's where it gets kind of confusing. So the resident thinks, oh, it's MOD staff that are telling me to do this and that and the other thing, and they don't like that. Well, it's really the MOD's only enforcing the mutual's rules and policies when they're directing a resident to do one thing or another, saying you can't do that or you can't build that or whatever. That's all coming direction from the mutual, coming through MOD to the resident. But it does get a little muddy and confusing. Now, GRF, our role is to run the amenities in the streets and the open spaces. That's what we do. So, so the Golden Rain Foundation Board makes all of its decisions and budgets and staffing decisions that are all pertaining to the amenities, the golfing operation, the fitness operation, the street maintenance. MOD's budget is set by the mutuals, and so when they've got to repair a roof or whatever, it's billable, or some of these are chargeable back to the resident if they made a modification to something. If it's mutual property that a resident didn't modify, then the mutual will be covering whatever that maintenance cost is in the mutual. But that's where it gets, so think of it as mutuals are responsible for the residential housing units. GRF is responsible for the amenities, and that's really it. MOD is kind of the bridge, but MOD is a creature of the mutuals, basically at their beck and call what they want to have done in their mutual and how they want it maintained.
So can you explain a little bit about the trust agreement and how that works with GRF?
So the trust agreement is kind of the equivalent to the CC&Rs for a mutual. The trust, it's an actual legal trust that was created in 1964, and GRF is the trustee. So the trust is called the Golden Rain Foundation Trust, and the Golden Rain Foundation Corporation, us, GRF, is the trustee of the trust. The trustor was Mutual Number One, and it's different than First Walnut Creek Mutual. There's actually a different entity. Everybody gets that confused. And in fact, I was confused about that until recently. I was reading the trust for fun, like I do, and I thought, is First Walnut Creek Mutual the same as Walnut Creek Mutual Number One? They are not. They actually coexisted for a period of time. Wow. And I don't know the history. There's no history. Nobody logged a history of that anywhere. So I don't really know.
The great mystery.
That is one of those mysteries that we'll never know the answer to. All the people that created GRF are all gone now, so we don't know. So the trust is where GRF gets all of its authority. And the trust is, we are here to provide amenities for the residents of the Rossmore community. Any mutual that is accepted as a beneficiary under the trust is, the people who live in that mutual now are members of the Golden Rain Foundation. And when they buy their unit, there's a transfer of their membership from the person they bought it. The seller has the membership, and they're transferring it to the new member, and hence the payment of a membership transfer fee. Not the same as a real estate transfer fee, because there are instances where transfers can take place without the transfer of property. A transfer fee charged for the transfer of real estate is illegal in California. You can charge an administrative fee, maybe $100, but a homeowner association can charge that. But we are exempt under the law. There are 3 communities in the state of California that are exempt under the law for charging a transfer fee because we are not a homeowner association.
Right.
We are defined under the law as a community service organization under the Davis-Sterling Act. And there's a specific exemption that before I got here, I think in 2013, that they applied for and got, now Congressman, but at the time State Senator Mark DeSaulnier, took the case. He helped, authored an amendment to the law to allow the Golden Rain Foundation of Walnut Creek, the Golden Rain Foundation of Seal Beach, California, and the Golden Rain Foundation of Laguna Hills, California, all received an exemption under the law because we were not a homeowners association. We were set up as a trust. And you know, back in that era, 1964, there were only a few dozen homeowners associations in California. Today, there's 55,000 homeowners associations in California. 9 million people in California live in an HOA. But in 1964, there was only maybe a couple of thousand people that lived in HOAs. So totally different things. So our developer came up with this idea. You know, condominiums didn't exist. That wasn't a thing. He came up with this idea, oh, how do you set one of these communities up? I want to develop a master plan community. That didn't exist back then. How do we do this? And they set it up as a trust with homeowners associations that he called mutuals. The law has since changed. Now they're all called HOAs, homeowners associations in California. But he called them mutuals. So that's what we're a little bit different. So we are, our governing authority comes from the trust agreement. And then from that, when the Golden Rain Foundation was incorporated, we created bylaws. And so the bylaws are the corporate rules, officers, membership rules, that kind of thing. But the trust is the authority that the trust owns these facilities. The trust owns the roads. The trust owns the open space. The trust owns all the clubhouses, all the golf course, all owned by the Golden Rain Foundation Trust, with GRF as the trustee, running it, managing it. Now we can be kicked out as the trustee. The mutuals, if they vote unanimously, can kick us out as the trustee, hire a bank or a property manager to be the trustee, and then GRF would dissolve. So there's no magic to that. It's just that we're called the Golden Rain Foundation, and the trust is called the Golden Rain Foundation Trust. But they could hire anybody to be the trustee, but it has to be a unanimous vote of the mutuals to make that kind of a change.
So unanimous vote of the mutuals also may become very necessary here pretty quickly since the trust is set to expire. Can you talk a little bit about how that expiration might work and what really needs to be done to safeguard the amenities in here?
So a lawyer here in Rossmore, who at the time was a mutual president, got very curious about this earlier this year, and was thought the literal reading of the trust agreement is that the trust expires 60 years after its creation. There's two clauses, 60 years after its creation, which would mean 2024, or there's another way that it expires. And that's where, and this is the way trusts were created in California at the time. They aren't done this way today, but they were back then. You define the trust, you associate the trust with a human life. And so in the trust agreement, there are, I think, 6 children named in the trust. They're not beneficiaries. They're just, the life of the trust is associated with their lives. And so it's X number of years. I think I'm forgetting it right now. We'll have to look this one up. Maybe George will put a thing on the screen. I think it's 20 years after the person passes away. So back in 2013, in early 2015, for the 6 years previous to that, GRF had a committee that understood this and knew that the trust was expiring at at either 60 years or the life of one of these 6 children that were named in the trust agreement. And so the committee tracked down 2 of the people. The other people, these children, who knows who they were?
Right.
We don't know who they were. There was an address, but these were babies, right? Who knows what they even look like today, or if they're alive. There was no social security number. It was just a birth date and a name. That was it. And so GRF hired a private investigator. They could only find 2 of them. Wow. Now, unfortunately, what happened was GRF at the committee meeting identified by name these 2 people at a public meeting. And so residents went after them and harassed them. Maybe not in a bad way, we don't know. All we know is they were harassed. According to these 2 people, they were harassed. And so by the time GRF got around to contact, so what had to happen is GRF had to get approval from the board to contact them. So that's a formal process
right?
that took a couple months to get through, right?
Right.
So it's brought up at the committee meeting. The committee votes, oh, let's make a recommendation to the board that we hire somebody to reach out to them. So that was a recommendation made to the board at the next meeting. The board then deliberated it and approved it, and then they went and reached out to these two people. But by then, the residents had already done the damage and said, we do not want to be contacted by anybody associated with this thing called Rossmore. We don't even know what Rossmore is. So it got ugly. One person said, I do not want to have any contact with you. But the second person said that too, but he also went to his dad, who was alive, who turns out to be the attorney who wrote the trust agreement. And the dad, who I think was in his 90s, said, son, acknowledge in an affidavit that you are who you are, that you are the survivor in that trust agreement. That just helps them. And so it set a point in time. Sorry, it was 21 years. It was 2013 when they identified this person. So 21 years later made it to the year 2034. I think it was April of 2034 was when he signed an affidavit identifying who he was. And he said, I never want to be contacted again. Golden Rain Foundation had offered, can we buy a life insurance policy on you? You'll never have to notify us. The life insurance company will notify us. I don't know what those terms were. Maybe if they had said, we'll buy a $100,000 life insurance policy for you, but I don't know if that's what they did. I think they just wanted a nominal like $5,000 policy or $1,000, whatever it was. And he said, no, I don't ever want to be contacted by anybody from Rossmore ever again. So we know then 21 years after that date is the expiration of the policy if we never hear when he passes away. If we're never able to figure out when he passes away, we don't know his social security number, right? So we're never going to be 100% certain who that person is at a later date. So we don't know when he passes away. Now, I did a little bit of sleuth work on my own, and I just recently determined that he is still alive.
Good.
So, but it's not official.
Right.
But good chance that he's still alive. So if we wanted to go through that process again with a private investigator doing some other backdoor without contacting him to determine whether or not whenever he passes away, technically then 21 years after he passes away is the expiration of the trust. But for sure, it's April of 2034. And then just recently, I determined that pretty good chance he's still alive. I know where he lives. The internet's amazing. So,
but in the event, I mean, take the 2034. If 2034 becomes that expiration date, what does GRF need to do?
Well, first, what happens when 2034 rolls around? If we never hear or can never verify whether he passes away, GRF expires on that date. So 21 years after he signed the affidavit saying that he is who he is, and his father confirming that as the attorney who wrote the trust agreement. Super helpful. That's the one we were able to identify. So what would happen is GRF dissolves. And what the trust agreement says, all GRF's properties and assets revert to the ownership of the mutual beneficiaries. Now, imagine how 23 mutuals are going to divvy up the streets, divvy up the clubhouses. How are you going to, who's going to run it? Literally, the corporation of GRF dissolves on that date. So there has to be a successor document. There has to be. Or it's chaos. Right? There's no way to run this. All the employees are let go. They're all terminated, on that date. So it can never get to that. It just can't get, it could get there.
but you hope
it can't.
not.
You don't ever want to go there.
Right.
So what has to happen is the mutuals have to unanimously agree on a successor document. When they tried this, in that exercise, it took for nearly 6 years, this committee worked on this. They came up with a draft new document, but it requires unanimous approval, and 2 mutuals would not approve it. They wanted more changes done. They wanted, so right now, every mutual has 1 vote. These mutuals wanted weighted average voting. So they wanted, if you have 100 units divided by 676 units, that's how much vote you get. If you have 1,800 units divided by 676, you have that power and authority. So the other mutuals couldn't agree to that.
Right.
Right now, the trust agreement says each mutual has one vote. And that's what all the other mutuals were willing to agree to. But 2 mutuals didn't want that. So it has to be unanimous. So it dissolved. The trust agreement, the proposed draft trust agreement then was filed away. So here we are, still operating with the 1964 trust agreement that is out of date, really out of date. And it can be extended in perpetuity by a unanimous vote of the mutuals because the law changed. When the trust was created, you could not do that. But now the law changed and you can, but it requires a new vote of the mutuals. And again, it has to be a unanimous vote. So who knows?
Has that vote taken place or that vote has not taken place
That
yet?
vote has not taken place. The board in February of 2020 approved hiring a lawyer to just do that. Just create a 1 paragraph or 1 sentence amendment to the trust agreement to present it to the mutuals to have them vote on. And then the pandemic happened 2 weeks, or a week later. March 4th of 2020 was when the first infection happened in Contra Costa County. And then March 17th of 2020 was when the state shut down everything. And so we put it on hold, and it's been on hold ever since. We've had other more pressing matters but we still have time. There's, 12 more years, but that time will go by quickly. This was a matter I inherited. Well, I didn't inherit it, it's just been dormant.
Right.
But they dissolved before I was hired. In the summer of 2015, they said, okay, we're done. We can't go anywhere. There's nowhere to go with this. The mutuals are unwilling to agree. So it died.
So that's a baton you get to pass off.
That is, unfortunately, I hate, that is when I really wanted to get, that's why we had it on the docket to be discussed in 2020 was let's get this thing done. That 1 sentence amendment to extend it in perpetuity. I would hope that wouldn't be controversial because the opposite is chaos. Nobody will want to move into Rossmore. No one will be able to sell their home. I mean, I'm painting a grim picture, but it will be grim.
Yeah.
You won't have any employees to run these amenities. There's no reason to move here. It's like, this has got to get done. One way or the other, it's got to get done. If the mutuals want to create a new model, they can do that. You don't want GRF anymore? Create something else. That's fine. You can do that. You have the power to do that, but it has to be done unanimously. So, and then you have to somehow seamlessly transition all the employees from GRF's payroll into a new entity. I'm not sure why you'd want to spend all the money to do all of that, but just make GRF what you want it to be.
Right.
You know, the mutuals have the power to do that. The cleanest, the easiest, the simplest, the thing that buys you the most time is a 1 sentence amendment that extends the life of the trust in perpetuity forever. And then you can unanimously decide to change the model at a later date and do that. So anyway, that's why this is important. I wrote about it at length this summer, and intentionally, after I had resigned, I felt I really needed to lay this out for the community so that somebody in the future could look back at that article and understand how and why this is important and the steps that are needed to take place in order to get this thing cleared up.
So also under the trust, if I know this correctly, the medical center, which is outside the gates, was part of that trust as well and has now been through the sale process. So assuming that the current buyer does in fact go through with the purchase, that's kind of a bit of a nest egg that falls back into the trust estate. So what do you see? I mean, what are some of the options for where that money can be spent, for what it can be done here in Rossmore?
Yeah, so let me first just describe the medical center quickly. So the model for Rossmore when it was originally built was that the developer said, we're going to take care of you, all the amenities, all your house, you're going to take care of your house for you. And again, remember, prior to that time, the whole idea of condominiums did not exist.
Right.
Stock co-ops existed on the East Coast. They were not in California. The idea of community living was a brand new concept. So he thought, hey, we're going to build, and he looked at the demographics, saw the baby booming generation, right? Ending in 1964, literally the year he started this development. That was the last year of the baby boom generation. So realizing that the earlier baby boomers from 1945, they're going to start retiring. And other retirees, let's develop this, let's create this, this idea of a retirement community, which was way, way ahead of his time. So it was like soup to nuts. We're going to take care of you, not only your home, not only all the things that are fun in retirement, but we're going to take care of your medical care too. And so he built the medical center outside the gate. So all the Leisure Worlds had a medical complex or medical center. Most of them are on the campus. So he built the shopping center, and he built as you go down Rossmore Parkway to the right, all those commercial properties were also all owned by the Rossmore developer as well, and transferred to the Golden Rain Foundation. So GRF owned all that commercial property to the east side of Rossmore Parkway. So the medical center where Bank of America is, those other retirement facilities, assisted living facilities, those were all, the properties, the land was all owned by the Golden Rain Foundation back then. The developer transferred it to GRF. Wow. Medical center, we continued to own because they kept trying to provide medical services, but fairly quickly, within about 5 years, the developer pulled out of the providing medical services. But, so what happened was the developer pulled out of Rossmore.
Right.
He sold all of his interest and continued to develop other Leisure Worlds, but not this one. Sold his interest to other developers. So GRF was left holding the bag on the medical center. So it owned the building, and here's this medical stuff that was just not sustainable. You just couldn't do it. And then Medicare started, I think, in 1965. And so that was kind of it's like, okay, Medicare now no longer was the need for the community to provide medical service, but it still tried to. So it was it was negative. We were every year subsidizing the coupon. Wow. The GRF coupon was subsidizing the providing medical services. It was not a good model. Yeah, then they spun it out as a separate corporation. So residents here were on the board of directors of the separate, I forget what it's called, Rossmore Medical Center or something like that. I think the corporation was called. And then, about 17 years ago, that was just not sustainable either. And then John Muir agreed to take over all the medical operation. So all the records transferred to John Muir Medical Center, and they leased the property from GRF. And they paid for everything. Even the maintenance, the insurance, the property taxes. GRF owned it, but John Muir paid for everything. It was a great lease for GRF and for the Rossmore community. And then John Muir pulled away about 1.5 years ago. They moved across the way in the smaller space. They didn't need that big space any longer. So we've been trying to market it, unfortunately, right at the beginning of the pandemic. And so anyway, we're in escrow now. It's scheduled to close, I believe, the first week of January of next year. And it will translate probably to several $1 million of equity after taxes to the Golden Rain Foundation. So your question was then, sorry, had to get there though, explain why we even have a medical center, because a lot of people don't understand that. So when it closes escrow, we will be done with the building. It is a new housing developer that has bought it. Right now, there are no contingencies left. Everything has been satisfied. So we're just waiting for it to close escrow. There is one more extension that the buyer can do, and that takes us to the beginning of January. And they've already told us that they plan on exercising the final option. Each option has been a 45-day extension. So, but you know, the financial capital markets are in flux right now.
Right.
So, and we lost out on a buyer 1.5 years ago at the beginning of the pandemic. When the pandemic began, we were in escrow, and they just got cold feet. All the people that were dying were people living in long-term care facilities, and that's what they were going to build. They thought, okay, there's no way we can do this, and so it became too unsettled, and they pulled out. This buyer, so far, seems to be intent on closing. So we're keeping our fingers crossed. So if it does close, we will have a fairly large amount of capital that will come into the Trust Estate Fund, which is currently only funded by membership transfer fees, but the rental income used to go into there for the medical center, into that fund as well. So it will give us the ability to have money to spend on other projects, whether it's pickleball courts, or whether it is an expansion of Gateway, or an expansion of Hillside, or a water recycling facility. It can only be used for capital, so that's what it'll be used to, or the board will hang on to it for some period of time until they figure out the best use. There's no decision made, really. There's been interest in planning that, but it's like, don't count your eggs before they hatch.
Right.
Let's wait till we close it, then you've got forever to figure out what you want to spend the money on. And we need to really understand what the tax implications are too. So
Sure.
we want to be as aggressive as we can be in allocating expenses against the gain, because it's literally on the books for nothing practically. So all the revenue from the sale will be taxable revenue. Non-member revenue is taxable. Membership revenue is not taxable.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So you touched on pickleball. Let's talk about not so much pickleball, but sort of the overlying. When you look at Rossmore, totally built out, very little land, adding amenities or trying to give an existing amenity a new facility becomes a lot more challenging.
Yeah.
How do you see sort of the future of that?
It's painful. So you know that there will always be things that people want.
Of course.
Whether it's a new game, shuffleboard. We used to have shuffleboard where the Peacock Hall is. There used to be shuffleboard courts there. It was called Peacock Hall because there were literally peacocks that roosted in the area around the shuffleboard courts. So those went away. They decided to forever name the theater Peacock Hall in memory of the beautiful peacocks that used to be here. But I guess they were, like the turkeys are mean and nasty, the peacocks are mean and nasty too. So anyway, every time we make a change to an amenity, there are people who want something different or something enhanced or object, because in order to expand any amenity means you're likely taking away something from somebody else. So when the tennis courts were expanded about 10 years ago, they expanded into the golf course. And that was highly controversial at the time, I'm told, before my time. When the event center was built, that was in front of the beautiful Stanley Dollar Mansion. That people liked looking out at the rolling grass. And when the 18th hole was expanded, that was upsetting, I'm told, to people. So every time you touch anything here, because we're completely built out, if there's a new game or a new, like pickleball, started I think in the 1960s up in Seattle as a game among family and friends kind of a thing, and it has morphed into this fastest growing sport in the United States. Everywhere, everybody has pickleball. Every city, every homeowners association is removing tennis courts and putting pickleball courts in. But again, removing tennis courts to put pickleball courts in. So that's why it's going to be a controversy wherever you put it. Here, I think we've more or less settled on the area right adjacent to the event center. It was unused part out of bounds of the golf course. So it's actually a grassy area that was not even part of the golf game. Although balls, if you're a bad golfer like me, you might hit your ball over in those areas. So we have to be cognizant of that we've got to still protect the pickleballers. But it looks like that's the area that has had the least amount of resistance. But again, it's not without resistance.
Right.
The neighbors 300 feet away on the other side of the fairway are concerned, understandably, about the noise and about their sight lines. Right now, they look out over a beautiful golf course. They look towards the event center. But now you're going to build some other structure, which we don't quite know what that's going to look like. And so I'm concerned about that. So those residents are understandably concerned, and especially about the noise. The pickleball noise is kind of relentless popping sound that you hear for as long as people are playing the game. So, but we think we can mitigate most, if not all, of that sound to make it less objectionable, if there's any objection whatsoever. So, but that's the lesson here, is that any amenity, no matter where we put it, anything, you're going to have people who are going to want something else there or nothing there, because you're going to block their view or obstruct their view or make noise in my quiet space. And that's understandable why people would object to that. That is the challenge in a community completely built out. There's just not room for anything new. And I don't have a magic, I put in the paper and at the last board meeting, I detailed all the different locations that we looked at for pickleball. The Creekside, I'm going to miss some of these, but the Creekside tennis court, the current location at Creekside, outside the gate at Tice Valley Park, behind the fire station, Tice Valley Gym, the Bank of America building, the Rite Aid building. Up at Hillside, we looked at the lawn bowling greens. We looked up at Sportsman's Park, which is where the bocce courts are. We looked up adjacent to the Hillside pool. There's kind of a flat area, just not big enough, unfortunately. I mean, we studied every one of these places. And of course, Buckeye, which created a firestorm of objections from the tennis club and then the residents around there. And then the site that we're at now. And there's even a site up, I always get these mixed up. Up near Mutual 68, between 68 and 61. There's kind of a flat-ish area there. There's a road, an access road for East Bay Mud to get to their water tower, but it's actually kind of flat there. You could maybe build something there. Literally, it's the only flat area left in Rossmore that's untouched. And it has spectacular views looking out over the whole valley. So it might be, I've heard some talk.
Maybe down the line.
Down the line, it's going to be a home for something someday. So, but not during my time.
It's interesting because in the facilities master plan, one of the things they talk about is instead of building out, build up.
Yeah.
So those are things we may see in the future, right? More two-story type buildings.
Yeah, and that would make sense like at Gateway, over the multi-purpose rooms. So the multi-purpose room, that wing, is old. It's one of the first amenities that was built here. It's very straightforward and simple. It's just 3 meeting spaces. But, bang for the buck, go up. Build a 2-story thing there. Build more meeting spaces. There's like, 2019, 22,000 room reservations on this campus in 2019, the year before the pandemic. That's head-scratching, mind-boggling how active this place is. We haven't hit those numbers since during the pandemic, but that shows you how busy this community is. Do we need, so people said during the facility master planning process, do we really need more spaces? Yeah, we do.
Obvious.
The clubs all want more locker space. They're all upset that they get a single locker to store all their stuff in, and it's not big enough. And so the stuff will expand, the activities will expand to fill the space allotted to it. So, I think there's always could be need. But that's Hillside and Gateway, 2 locations where a multi-story, and at Epping MOD, the 3 locations where a multi-story complex would make some sense. But you're talking about many millions of dollars to do those kinds of things. And so there's only so much we can do. We're going to be out of money actually by the end of this year in the capital fund. So when the medical center sells, that'll provide a lot of new funding to figure out where the next board wants to spend their money.
There's a lot of residents in here who'd like to see that money spent looking more towards emergency preparedness, especially with wildfires. Is there any areas that you see where maybe we should still be touching on, we should be doing more?
Well, we talked a little bit about water recycling in our first part of this series. Water recycling is really expensive. We just heard from Central Sand and East Bay Mud at a workshop in Lafayette that all the communities were invited to, Moraga, Lafayette, Walnut Creek, Rossmore. We were all invited to. It was pretty full at the Veterans Hall. Central Sand and East Bay Mud made it pretty clear there's no plans to bring recycled water here. So if we're going to do it, we got to do it on our own. But that is going to have to be the future for California, is going to have to be more and more recycled water. Should they bring water here? I think they should, but they are not willing to invest in it. They want to bring potable water to more regions, potable recycled water to more regions, but that's a hard sell. That's the ick factor. Recycling toilet water into drinkable water. A lot of people have trouble with that, but it's already being done in California, and it's being done all around the world in many places, just not in a big way here. But that's likely, drought is going to be with us. That's really the dynamic that changed. Starting, in 2016, 17 with the Napa and Sonoma fires, when you get these massive fires, then we've seen nothing but massive fires every summer, although this summer was a little quieter than the others. But it's going to be a way of life. And if you value the fact that we are in this beautiful valley surrounded by oak-studded hillsides, it's always got to be and it's wood frame construction with most of it not sprinklered in the housing here, you've got to do all you can to protect the valley. And keeping an irrigated green space down the middle is one important element of that. The other is the hillsides, and ensuring that we're doing all we can to mitigate as much as we can. And you can't just go cut trees down. That's against the law. We can't go cut oak trees down.
Right.
Every one of those requires a permit. So, and the city is not, they make it very difficult, understandably. The natural beauty is part of what makes Rossmore and Walnut Creek exceptional and beautiful. So you can't just go willy-nilly and start cutting trees down. But CAL FIRE did get that $3 million grant this year. Next year, we expect them to begin that work, is to clear out. That'll make a huge dent in mitigating the fire risk here to the Rossmore Valley.
Fires are such a big topic, even beyond just being prepared for it. Look at what's happening with insurance. I mean, every resident going into 2023 is going to feel that effect. And I realize fires are only part of it, but can you talk a little bit about the challenge that Rossmore faces in trying to insure the entire valley and where you see that possibly heading in the future?
Yeah. So I've been doing management for nearly 40 years. Next year will be 40 years. And I've been in management the entire time, from the time I got out of college. And I have seen, I was either a CFO or a COO or a CEO throughout my working career. So I've seen insurance goes through cycles. It has a hard market, which is what we're in right now, and then it goes into a soft market. So up and down, up and down. And a hard market meaning that the insurance industry can basically dictate prices, and the consumer, the business, whatever, has to just take it. You have no choice.
Right.
A soft market is exactly the opposite. It's where rates are coming down because the competition's heated up in the insurance marketplace. More insurers jump in because there's big dollars, and it is good again for the consumer and for businesses. So right now we're in the worst hard market ever in the insurance. But as I said, over 40 years, I've seen it go up and down, up and down, up and down. That's what insurance does. And everybody, I've put this in the paper every year or every 2 years or so, everybody forgets that until 4 years ago, we were in a 7-year cycle, year after year, with insurance premiums going down with one exception. 7 years with one exception. Down, 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 down. Year after year. What goes down? Nothing goes down.
Exactly.
McDonald's hamburger goes up every year, right? But insurance kept going down. So we were at roughly $1 to $1.5 million premiums for years. And then this year, we're at $10 million. Next year, for the Valley, $15 million.
Wow.
That's 10 times higher than it was 4 years ago. So 10 times, a tenfold increase. I mean, my gosh. So is it going to stay that way forever? I don't think so. I think we will someday get rain again in the winter, and someday, it'll soften these things back up. Insurers will be less concerned. But the climate crisis, the drier climate here, the less rainfall here, the less snowfall in the Sierra, all of that has led to the situation we're in right now. But it probably will change again. It'll go back to its long-time cycle. Probably we are in a long-term warming trend. So is it going to go back to $1 million, $1.5 million premiums? Probably not. But I don't think it's going to stay at a $15 million level forever. But unfortunately, well, here's what residents I know don't understand, because I get the correspondence.
Right.
They, and you get them, letters to the editor.
You bet.
That we're not doing enough to control costs. Okay, number one, there are no other options. No other options. The mutuals have already tested this. They've tried to go out and get bids. No one will bid. No, not only are there not other insurers, no one's clamoring for this business. There are no other options. We have an extraordinary program here. If we were all on our own, if every mutual and GRF were on our own with insurance, you're probably looking at $30 million next year in premiums. not
That's
15.
crazy.
Yeah. So we are really fortunate to have the program that we have. And it isn't one insurer. There are about 40 insurers that make up this package, all taking levels of risk. This level, this level, this level over here. This like it's like a quilt. It literally looks like a quilt when you look at it on a screen. This insurer takes 0 to 5 million. This insurer takes 5 to 7.5 million. This insurer takes 7.5 to 10. This one takes 10 to 15. This one takes 200 million to 300 million. We have $1.7 billion in coverage that we have to figure out. So it takes 40 insurers to put this program together. So it's very complex. We have a great team managing this whole thing for us. Next year, we are taking a part of the risk called a retained risk program at the lowest levels, which is where we have all the losses historically.
Right.
That $0 to $10 million layer, that's the most expensive. That's like half the premium is in there. From 10 million to 1.7 billion is the rest of the premium. I'm making the numbers up a little bit, but it's roughly like that. It's like that first 10 million is where most of the premium, half the premium comes out of. So that's the most expensive layer by far, because that's where we have all the claims. So the Paradise style wipeout situation, they're willing to take those risks. So the chances of that happening are slim and none. It's likely not going to happen. But because it's only happened once in California. It happened in Paradise. It hasn't happened anywhere else before or since. Santa Rosa, yes, but it wasn't as bad as Paradise. So anyway, it will soften at some point, but we're in for some hard times. It's making up a larger and larger part of the mutual coupons. I know residents say, it's getting too expensive to live here. But let me tell you, you and I are homeowners, right? My insurance and my home has gone up ridiculously expensive.
Yes.
If you live in the foothills, if you can even get insurance, up in like the Sacramento foothills, as you head up towards Lake Tahoe, most of those policies are canceled. They're getting it out of the state program now, where they're getting $20,000, $50,000 deductibles before the insurance will kick in. And by the way, the premium is $20,000 to insure your home for 1 year. Can you imagine?
No.
I can't afford that. But I'm, you and I, we don't live in the foothills, but we're, as homeowners, it's everybody. It's not just, residents have to understand that. It's not Rossmore that they're picking on. It's the whole insurance industry is in flux because of hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, and wildfire. Those are all the risks. And we don't have hurricanes and tornadoes in California. Sometimes, every once in a while, a tornado, but that's rare.
Right.
But hurricanes, I heard that the latest hurricane caused more damage than Ian, which was in Vero Beach, I guess. I was just reading that this morning, which wasn't as big of a storm, but it caused more damage because they hadn't recovered from Ian a month ago. Yeah. So, yeah, hard to say what the future's going to look like. It probably will soften, just don't know when. And then it'll come down a little bit, and maybe hopefully for a few years.
It's a lot about perspective and perception. So I'm going to sort of shift gears here and talk about along that same line. There tends to be a perception in here that Rossmore is still very white, even though, certainly since I've been here in the last 4 years, diversity seems to be much more global. We're seeing it with our staff. You see it with the residents. There's lots of ethnic clubs in here. The Diversity Festival is probably one of the biggest events we now put on. How much of a shift have you seen, and where do you think diversity here in Rossmore is going?
So I would venture a guess, and I have no data to support this, that in 1964, 1974, 1984, 1994, probably 95, certainly over 90% white for the first 40 years, probably here, at least 30, before you probably started to see a shift. And even today, I brought the numbers just because this is important. In the census data from 2020, so that's the most recent census, Rossmore is not tracked as a separate census tract.
Right.
It's actually made up of several tracts. You have to add them all up to get the numbers. So I did that. Rossmore is 80.4% white. Now, they lump, I could not quickly find how they broke out the Hispanic population in there. So Hispanic is considered white under the census, however they figure out the rules for this stuff. So 80.4% in the most recent census.
Wow.
Less than 1% Black or African American, less than 14% Asian, and the rest, Native Hawaiian, American Indian, much slower, 2 or more races, 4%. And that makes up Rossmore. So it's gotten a little less white, but not by much. And probably the greatest change has been in the Asian ethnicity, probably. And again, I don't have historical data to look at. Nobody's ever tracked this. So I there's probably a way to get it out of the Census Bureau, but that's way beyond my skill set. It's daunting to try to navigate, to try to find this information for the most recent census. But I think what will happen over time is Rossmore will increasingly look closer to the state demographics, but we're a long, long way from that. I think that the statewide, the Hispanic population now is more than 50% in California. So, but we don't see that here in the Bay Area as much. It's mostly Southern California, where you have a higher number of Hispanic population than you do here. But here in Rossmore, really pretty lily white. Now, our workforce is very different. Our workforce is much closer to the statewide averages. Still not quite there. But I've had, and the reason I even looked this up a couple months ago, this past summer, was because I had, just coincidentally, had several residents over the course of a couple of weeks write me emails telling me that we're not doing enough to promote inclusivity and diversity here, and they wanted us to do more around diversity. And you know what GRF doesn't own any property. GRF doesn't sell homes. GRF doesn't own any of that. So we can't, even if we could, that would be illegal.
Right.
You can't make, we're going to only sell to Black people or to Hispanic people. No white people are allowed. You can't do that. That's illegal also. So, but in any case, GRF has no control whatsoever because we don't own or operate any property here. So the people that buy here have tended to be white historically. And obviously, if we're still 80% right now, still predominantly white. But I think that that's going to change. It's going to, more and more, you're going to see more Asian, more Black, more Hispanic, more people of mixed races that are moving into Rossmore, because it's going to look, over time, closer to the state demographic. But we have a long way to go before we get there. Now, the workforce here, as I said, is much more diverse. 51% white. Now, the workforce, this is not from census data. It's also illegal for us to require our staff to disclose what their ethnicity and racial makeup is. So this is our HR department taking a best guess at people's ethnicity and race. So 51% white, about 5% Black, about 30% Hispanic, and about 10% Asian, about 2.5% mixed, 2 or more races. So it looks much closer to the state makeup, but still, even the workforce is not that. But Northern California does not mirror yet the full state. It's still much whiter, and the further north you go, the whiter it gets.
The other topic, which deals both with residents and staff, and it's really sort of become the it topic, if you will, since the pandemic, the level of civility. This has come up with the GRF board. You've discussed it in your CEO report. We see it in letters to the editor. Why are we here? Why aren't we at a point where we have to talk about civility, and where do you see this sort of going?
So clearly, this is not an issue just affecting Rossmore. So let's just be clear. I don't want anybody, and I've already heard those complaints that you're picking on Rossmore. It's like, no. Everybody everywhere that works in a service business, whether you're an airline flight attendant or you're a restaurant waitress or server, everybody, you're working at a counter somewhere, everybody is being abused by the customer. And it's not that didn't exist before the pandemic, but for whatever reason, the pandemic seems to have brought out the worst in everyone. It brought out our fears and anxieties about mortality, probably, and entitlement. I mean, all these things. And again, not just Rossmore. This is everywhere. And maybe in my, I don't know, rose-colored glasses that I probably wear more often than I should, I've always believed that Rossmore could be and should be and is better than that. And so it was particularly disheartening to be the subject of much of the vitriol these last 2.5 years, because I've always thought Rossmore is smarter than outside of Rossmore, that we're more compassionate, that we're more caring, and I've certainly met many people who are.
Me too.
The huge majority of people here in Rossmore are, but the others have gotten worse. The attacks on staff. We've always had that. We've always had our golf maintenance worker driving his vehicle out on the golf course, who's from Guatemala, being yelled at and said, you're interrupting my game, turn off your motor or whatever, go back to Mexico where you belong. Well, just how wrong is that on multiple levels? A Guatemalan being told he's Mexican and then being told to go back to where he came from, kind of thing. I mean, we've had that, and that's existed forever, and that's wrong. And unfortunately, it just kind of comes with the territory. I think people that have identifiable racial or ethnic traits or characteristics get discriminated against. That's despicable and wrong, but it's part of society. I'm not making an excuse for it. It's just, it is what it is. And over time, that hopefully changes. And it feels like there's certain elements of our society today where ethnic music is more celebrated. For example, on the radio, you hear it a lot more. I saw over the weekend that the Black Panther, the follow-up movie, was huge over this weekend. And that's all a whole cast of African-American actors. That's awesome. It's like, that has to be, it's not just African-Americans going to see the movie.
Right,
it's
absolutely.
a huge population of white people going to enjoying that as well, and music and entertainment. So it's changing, but it's changing very, very slowly. And in a senior community, old habits are hard to break. And where you grew up, the prejudices that you brought with you when you came here are obviously still here. They're much harder to break. Fortunately, we have a lot of residents here who are calling people out, who are not afraid to call people out on that. And when I started profiling this in my columns in the newspaper back, I think in March of 2022, I really called it out because we had lost some really good employees because they were being abused and they just couldn't take it anymore. And that, what a shame to lose talent like that in a time when we could not afford to lose anybody. And we're losing really good people because they just couldn't take the abuse any longer. And so, I don't know, what does that look like for Rossmore in the future? I think that, I think residents have told me since I've called it out, since we formed a civility task force from the Golden Rain Board, they have called to tell me that they're calling it out. They're not standing for it any longer.
That's great.
And somebody told me on the phone, actually just like a week ago, said, just because you brought these out to our attention, I won't tolerate it anymore. And I used to hear that like an employee be abused, and I would just walk away. But I called somebody out on that, a lifeguard that was being abused by a resident. I called them out on that's uncalled for and wrong. And it's like, that's maybe what it's going to take. And how unfortunate that we have to do that. But if that's what it's going to take, that's what has to be done. And like the Diversity Festival, this is the second one that we did in October. The first one a year ago. The first real event we had with large participation coming out of the pandemic a year ago. How exciting that was! It was like a buzz. And then everybody was excited after that event. Let's do it again next year. And to have it be as so well received as it was, to move it to the event center in a bigger space because there just was not enough space at Gateway, at the Fireside Room last year, and at the Peacock Hall. So I think these are the beginnings of the community, of probably a small group, educating the rest of the community that diversity is good. It's good for Rossmore. It's good for society. It's how inventions are created. It's how we are better when we take everybody and all their world experiences and accept them for who they are. It makes it interesting, makes life interesting, makes entertainment more fun. What would we do if Steve Jobs' dad didn't immigrate to the United States, right? Where would we be without smartphones and Apple computers and all the, everything, the light bulb. So many things have been invented by immigrants. Alexander Graham Bell was a Scottish immigrant. The list goes on and on and on. So we are better, America is better, certainly Rossmoor's better, to be accepting of diversity and inclusion and being welcoming, opening up your arms when you meet somebody from a new culture. It's all good. I have tried to do that while I've been here. I've had some nice notes that people have written me actually recently, thanking me for my leadership on this over the years. But I've had others tell me that, you're a white male, you can't possibly understand a female's perspective or a person of color's perspective. No, I can't. I haven't lived it, but I've worked in this field for a long time. 15 years of my career have been in social services or serving here in Rossmoor. Even longer in property management in Southern California, where we were also doing some of the same kinds of things around welcoming and inclusiveness. So I think that you don't have to be of color or female necessarily to do this work, but you have to be empathetic. You have to put yourself in those shoes to at least try to understand whatever discrimination or pain or abuse or anger or resentment that person's experiencing. But I can tell you that I've certainly gotten my share of that as a white male. So, but not the same as what somebody who's being discriminated against. I can't say I've experienced that. Yeah. So it does require empathy and understanding. And my hope is that I think the good always overcomes the bad and the evil and the wicked, always. And because human nature is that way. We're wired, I believe, to do good and to be good and to help others. It's what all the major religions talk about, is being accepting and welcoming those that are the rejects of society, the disabled, the poor, the homeless, the hungry. Every religion invites that and welcomes that and honors that and rewards that even. So I think Rossmoor is built that way too. We need to get back to that we can't be afraid to speak up. We can't be afraid to act out. We can't be afraid to call out when somebody's behaving wrong and treating another person wrong. And I also want to be clear, it isn't just employees. I can't tell you how many times I have heard examples where people have called me and said, this person's mistreating me, my neighbor, or whatever. And I hear those a lot. It's resident on resident, treating each other badly, treating club leadership badly, treating mutual leadership badly. These are all volunteers doing this stuff to try to make Rossmoor better. We can all be civil. There's no reason we can't be civil. Just because you got an answer that you disagree with does not give you a license to berate or use foul language or to physically even attack somebody. No license to do any of that. We can talk civil, and if it's not the answer you want to hear, run for office. Run for the club leadership. Run for the mutual leadership. Run for the Golden Rain leadership. Run for the position and be the change that you want to see in the world. That's what you can do.
So as we wrap up, let's end on a positive note. Okay. Despite the pandemic, despite the fact that we've got a great recession, and there were a lot of folks who did leave, quite a few staff members stayed the whole time, the whole way through. What's it been like to work with this group of individuals?
That's honestly the two best parts of working in Rossmoor. There's more than two, but the two best are the great residents who I adore and have loved to work with and serve and provide services to, and the staff. The staff is exceptional, and I know that the residents don't necessarily see that. They don't get to pull the curtain back, right, and see what's going on behind there, where the sausage is being made. The staff, I see, tremendous dedication, loyalty, kindness, compassion. Wow, I have been so fortunate to be the CEO of such a great group of people. Those that put up with the abuse day in, day out. It doesn't get under their skin. And honestly, it does. It's got to on everybody a little bit. But the work order desk, we get 40,000 work orders a year at the work order desk. 40,000, 44,000 last year. It's mind-boggling. Sometimes 300 a day.
Yeah.
And those people put up with a lot, and they can do it with a smile on their face at the end of the day, and do it again tomorrow, and the day after, and a week, and month, and year, and after year after year. They like the service. They like, so many of the interactions are positive. And I know that what I used to think of when I first came to work here was meeting all these really great people, was because I didn't think I was that old, but I was old enough to move in when I first came to work here. I was 55, and I'm 62 now. But I would think about my grandparents and how much I adored my grandparents and my parents, and how much I would want to make sure they were safe. And although they didn't live here, what would I do for my mom and my dad and my grandma and my grandpa? And that's how I tried to run this place. I wanted to do it in a way that would honor them, that would make them feel safe if they were living here. And I cannot tell you, literally, I get something like, it's like 25,000 emails a year. If I got 25,000, I wrote at least 25,000 going out every year. So times 7, so 200,000 emails probably in the years that I've been here. And every single one, I would type it out, and I would read it. Sometimes I'm in response to some really mean, really cruel, angry, vindictive emails. And I'd first write what I really wanted to say, and then I would set it aside, and I'd go do other stuff, and then I'd pull it back up, and I'd read it again. I thought, okay, well, it just felt good to say that, and I'd delete. And then I write it again, and then I would read it like a third time from the perspective of my mom receiving it. Would my mom be okay with me writing this? My mom has passed away, but she was always a great teacher and the ultimate encourager. And I would read it, okay, my mom would be okay with this. All right, and I said it, and I hit send. And especially the difficult, the really challenging ones, I would always run it through that filter, because has been my philosophy the whole time. I want to make sure that my mom would be safe receiving this. My mom would, that I'm answering the questions adequately, that I'm maybe not giving them the answer they wanted to hear, but I'm giving them the truth, always. Right. And so anyway, I think, I don't know, I'm kind of sad to see it end.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm really sad to see it end. I'm excited about my future. I'm grateful for the extremely talented senior management team like you and your colleagues that I've gotten the privilege of working with, and this exceptional staff. And then the volunteer boards, and not just for GRF, but the mutual boards and the various committees for the Golden Rain Foundation, and the club, many, many club leaders that I've met over the years. It's like, what a great place to come to retire and, live out, have fun. Maybe in many cases for the first time. You're
Right.
kind of unchained from the job. You're now you're playing golf and tennis and bridge and whatever, your pickleball and whatever, lawn bowling and acting. Maybe you wanted to be an actor, and now you're kind of living that dream. So I've just, this has been a great, great place. I'm proud of the work that we did here. I'm sorry to leave it. I hope that I'll get invited back every once in a while to
I bet you will.
see the new things that get added here. But yeah, I've appreciated this a lot.
Well, you've certainly earned it. On behalf of the residents and the staff, thank you.
Thanks, Ann.
It's been a great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us. For those who missed the first episode with Tim, please check the TV guide in both the newspaper and online and check that one out. Thank you very much.